Welcome to the Under the Hat podcast, the show where we talk about everything and anything that is top of mind in education. The goal is to provide meaningful conversation to what is currently happening in our classrooms. Stories, pains, moments of success. We want to hear it all. Friends, welcome back to another episode. I believe we're on episode 10 of Under the Hat podcast. And I'm super pumped today because I get to share a conversation or have a conversation with somebody that I always used to just see like on the interwebs. Like I used to be like, who is this Stephanie Howell? And then like one day I showed up to work, virtual work, right? Working from home. And I was like, oh, I get to work with Stephanie. And so we've gotten to know each other a lot better over the last, I guess, few months. And so Stephanie is, to me, one of those people that is leading the charge of what could be done in the classroom. She's somebody that doesn't have to be loud to lead at a global level. And so, again, super excited to have you here, Stephanie. But how are you tonight?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be here. 10th episode. That's amazing. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And I feel the same way. I would see you on Twitter or somehow like in queue photos, and I'm like, who's
sure.
Steve? Like, I know this guy. And then I show up to work and I'm like, oh my gosh, I get to work with this incredible human being.
Yeah, no, and the feeling's mutual, and kind of, like we see each other online. Like there's a lot of voices in the space, right? In education and in ed tech. And but just connecting in this way and like working, getting our hands dirty like that, together, really doing the work and putting in that hard work has been amazing. So Stephanie, like, there's a lot of people here that are probably in the chat now, which, by the way, if you're in the chat, drop in, say hello, give us that love. But people that maybe are watching now or in the future, if they don't know you, maybe a little backstory in terms of where'd you come from, how'd you get into teaching, and then perhaps where you're headed. Where do you see your journey go?
Yeah. So if you don't know me, I'm Stephanie. I did not want to be an educator when I was little. Like that was one thing that I did not want to go into. I hated school as a child. So growing up in the second grade, I was diagnosed with a learning disability. And I really struggled in school, especially the way that teachers taught. It was direct instruction, there was no differentiation. I struggled with reading, and so there was a lot of like round robin type of reading. And I'm like, can I use the bathroom? Like, I don't want to do this. And so that was kind of my journey is I struggled all the way through because of how my teachers taught. It was again, sit, get, listen, and then you take a test on Friday. And none of that information was retaining in me because I'm a doer. I love creating. I love doing projects and really exploring. And so it wasn't until high school when I met these friends of mine who had multiple different disabilities that were way more physical and you could see them compared to mine, where mine was a hidden kind of disability. Like most people don't know I struggled with a learning disability because you can't see it, right? And so when I met these friends, one of them, his name was Chucky, I realized that I needed to become a special education teacher. And so I went down that journey and graduated, got a job, and I didn't realize how hard it was to advocate for my students. And hearing other teachers talk about my students, I mean, I sometimes struggled because I was that child that they were talking about, right? And that was really hard for me. And so I just realized that change needed to happen. And change isn't going to happen by me yelling, right? It's not going to change if I yell at people. And so I just started innovating. I started to try new things, fail forward. I was one of the first teachers in my district to try this thing called Google Classroom. Back in 2014, it was brand new. Everyone was scared of Google, right? And I tried it and I found a lot of success due to the accessibility tools that technology had to offer to my students. And so that's kind of my journey. And then from there, I went and I became an instructional technology coach. And then my journey really exploded when I went into the Google Innovator Academy.
Mm. Yeah, like there's something that what you said like really resonated with me in the sense of the round robin reading. Because that's stressful for anyone. So like a little story about that for me personally. This was in college. I was in a college class. It was like a philosophy class. And for some reason, our teacher thought it was a good idea to like do round robin, whatever crazy books we were reading. And we were all reading it. Popcorn reading. Yes, okay. So Samantha just dropped that in the popcorn. That's 100% what it used to be called. And I remember like getting low key like freaked out, and you feel that anxiety. And I was a grown person like in college, and I would be like, okay, that person has that paragraph, that person has that paragraph, and then I was like,
Uh-huh,
wait,
uh-huh.
going out and finding which one it would be me, right? That would be mine, right?
Yeah.
And so I totally feel that. And the other thing that's kind of inspiring is like you're like OG Google Classroom, right? In
It
terms of
was.
when you started using it.
Yeah.
So
Oh, it's rough.
yeah, and you've probably seen it change a lot too, right? And
Yeah.
you kind of see like, how it's evolved, and that's super powerful. I have to say, Stephanie, that like I always had a mad like level of respect for our sped teachers, for our special
Mhm.
education teachers, just because it's the level of differentiation and like customized support that you had to provide. I don't know if you want to share insights on that, because to me, that's a level of talent that is truly amazing.
Yeah, I mean, my students were all over the place. I had students that were above grade level, but maybe in math and they like struggled in reading. Then I had the vice versa, and I had different abilities, some behavior issues as well. Like, I just remember on my wedding day, like, I told this kid, like, we were tight. I was like, if there's any behavior issues, I'm coming to the school in my dress. And like, there were issues, and like, people would not let me go, but I was like, I gotta go. Like, I said I was going to, and he probably like wanted me to be there, like he probably did it on purpose, right? But the amount of work that a special education teacher does is amazing. The paperwork, I think, is what kind of burnt me out, right? Like, there's
Mm,
that piece. It's also very difficult to fight for what you know your students need in an IEP meeting, and then district office is saying no, like, no, your students can't have that. No, they can't have spelling on the test, but they're spelling in every day. So why is it they can't have this accommodation, or why can't they have read aloud on the English test when they have it every single day? So that was very difficult for me on a personal level, just because I knew what it was like, to be that child, and to think about that. And so I worked with a lot of co-teachers. Our school really pushed inclusion, which is incredible because a lot of schools were just kind of starting that as well, and not being self-contained in a special ed classroom. So I worked with multiple different teachers, and I had to learn how to build that relationship so they saw me as an equal part. And it was sometimes awkward, like at the beginning of the year, you don't know the classroom procedures. So kids would be like, Miss Howe, can I go to the bathroom? And I'm like, Miss Markham, can they go to the bathroom right now? Like, like you're a guest in that teacher's classroom. And so
right.
there's so many different pieces that people don't realize when it comes to a special ed teacher. And their hat, they're wearing many types of hats, right? They're wearing that they've got to communicate with the parent. They've got to sometimes love on students because their home life might be difficult. They might be having to differentiate different levels all of the time. And they also have to know the content. Like, I had to know the content in order to provide those scaffolds for my students. And that way, my regular ed teacher would be able to trust me as well. And so I luckily had amazing co teachers that I worked with. And so we were really able to, if you walked in our classroom, you wouldn't know who the reg ed or the spec ed teacher was. You would just
Mm,
walk in and you would see different activities happening because we use blended learning to really support our learners.
that's amazing. That's amazing. And so we do know, or maybe I should say, at least I know, that you did leave the classroom, right, at some point. So what was that transition like? Did you transition somewhere else in the district? Did you like kind of what happened after that moment, or what caused that moment to happen?
Yeah, I started to see the impact of technology. And again, this was like technology was just coming out into the classroom 10 years ago. So go back in time, and we used to not be one on one. Like we used to have iPad carts. And so I hogged the carts. So we were one to one in my classroom, but we weren't supposed to be. Um, and so with that, I just fell in love with how technology could support students' learning and provide them with those creation skills and those supports for some students to have those accommodations right at their fingertips. And they didn't need me to stand over them to support them. And so, because I found that power, I started to present and share my knowledge. We had like an innovation conference, and one of my, he was my old boss, he asked me to present, and I'm like, I don't want to talk in front of people, right? But then it kind of started, and I got hooked. I got this like buzz of like, oh my gosh, this is really cool that I'm sharing. And people really loved what I was sharing and actually using what I was sharing with them and asking me questions after the session, which I thought was really cool. And so, because of that, I then applied for our instructional technology coordinator role. And I was a instructional technology coordinator for a while. That job then kind of transitioned into coaching because I really loved the coaching piece in that role. And the coordinator role was becoming more admin. It was like a 260 contract where I was like,
Mhm.
I need the teacher contract because I'm about to have, I'm having kids, and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So I was able to move into a coaching role where I was able to coach teachers and really support them in a one-on-one capacity in small group.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And so, you know, you now work for an ed tech company.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's, obviously fun because it's the company I work at. Of course it's fun. And so you've also, and so the title of this episode, what it means to lead, you obviously were a leader locally, right?
Mhm.
Like, within the classroom, grassroots in the classroom, moved up to the district level. Um, but I came with this title of leading locally and globally, because you did manage to create a pretty powerful influence on the social media space. Um, Things like the Gold EDU,
Mhm.
and kind of, I was kind of being nosy earlier, checking out the YouTube channel and kind of the content that's there and all that. It was really amazing. Um, so what kind of steps did you make? Like what kind of maybe roadblocks, successes in leading in that way? And maybe if people don't know what Gold is, maybe talking about that a little bit too.
Yeah, so I had a boss who pushed me. He would not send me to conferences unless I was presenting and my session got accepted. So if my session got accepted, I could go to pretty much any conference within Ohio. And because of that, I was like, I want to go. I want to learn from all these amazing educators. And Eric Kurtz is a big educator, right, in our Ohio. So I was like, I want to go. I want to see Eric. I want to see all these really amazing educators. And so I would have to put in and then present. And so then I had another coworker that was like, you need to apply for Google Trainer. Applied for it, got in, loved the community, and then they had Innovator pop up, and I applied for that. So that's where my hat is from. So I'm sporting my Google Innovator hat. We went putt-putting one night and got little visors, so there we go. And,
It's adorable.
yeah, and what Innovator did is it completely changed my life. I was really kind of focused at like a state district kind of level. And when I went to Innovator, I didn't realize how big the world was. I got
Mm.
accepted to the Google Innovator in Australia. So I had to travel all the way to Australia. It was 23 hours. I was exhausted. My husband went with me, and the person next to him on the plane fell asleep on his shoulder. It was really funny because we didn't know him at all. But then we got to Australia and I met amazing Aussies and people from New Zealand, and there was 7 Americans as well. And it was amazing. They used design thinking, which I know you're very familiar with. And that was the first time I kind of saw design thinking. And I was just like, oh my gosh, why am I not using this in my coaching cycles? Why am I not using this in
Mm.
my classrooms with my teachers? Why am I not using this to solve problems in my school district? And so that right there began a movement within me. And in Google Innovator, you have to create a project. And so my project was, how might we create higher learning activities for students with disabilities?
Mm.
So a lot of times I'd walk into classrooms, the students with different disabilities were working on a DOK level 1 activity. I would walk in, they're working on basic recall. There was not much creation with that group. The kids that were gifted, guess what they got to do? All the cool activities. And again, that just broke my heart because that's not differentiation at all.
It's
A lot of
isolation. It's
yes,
isolation.
a lot of times those kids are really bad at recall. Their working memory, right, is sometimes a part of their disability. And you're making
Mhm.
them just do that task to get it into their memory. Like, it just really bothered my heart. And so that was my project. And I went back and that's what I worked on when I went back to Pickerington. And then what happened is I got on a Twitter fight. I'm really competitive and I love competition and I love being the best. Okay. Like, I just want to be the best constantly. Right. And there was this guy, his name was Abid. And do you know Abid Patel? Steve, do you know Abid? Good. Glad you don't.
Okay. Okay. I can't say that I do.
Good. Yeah, you don't want to know him. And so what happened is, I hope he's listening. Abid, what happened is he was putting something about his innovator cohort, which was in London, so the UK, and they had this guy dancing. And so this became a huge, huge dance battle, right? So we're going back and forth about this dance battle, and then we became best friends. And then what happened is we were like wanting to get our local GEGs. So GEGs are Google Educator Groups started. And so we would get these GEGs started. And with these Google Educator Groups, what happened is I would get a really cool speaker. And then Abbott's like, can I throw in the GEG UK logo? And so we had all these logos on these like advertisements on social media that we were just like, let's become global GEG. Because it was overtaking the advertisement of all these little GEGs. And so that's what started. And then COVID hit and we started to really just support teachers with what they needed.
Yeah. And so just to be clear, I did have to go look them up. And I was like,
Do you know?
oh, well, I know him in the same way that I knew you, right? It's just like we all see each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I'm like, okay, like we've never met personally, if that is what the question was. But I have seen him around the interwebs. But yeah, no, that's funny.
Yeah. And then from Global GEG, again, doing those boot camps, supporting educators during a really crucial time. And we were just using our network. And that's how my PLN started to grow because there was 6 of us that founded Global GEG. Stephanie Rothstein, who's also in California, Abid, who's in London, Luis, and then Leslie and Bonnie. And all of us came together with all of the people in our network from our states. And we started just doing webinars for teachers. And it was a blast. We learned so much. We were able to really grow. And then what I kind of decided as the pandemic was ending was that my next like innovator project was going to be Gold EDU, where teachers just share resources, ask for help in a safe environment where they're not judged or they're not kind of criticized for asking that crazy question. And that has grown like crazy. There's over 8,000 people in the Google group, and we just email. I mean, if you don't like emails, don't join or limit your emails to what you get in the subscription, because I mean, there are so many emails coming in that group, but everybody is just helping each other. Everyone's sharing whatever they have in their Google Drive or resources that they have or know about.
That's awesome. That's amazing. And it was like, it just felt like it was like the cohort of you all, right?
Mhm.
Really combining together and leaning on the already existing networks that you obviously already had, right? And so that, yeah, that to me makes a lot of sense in terms of, not only collaborating on messages that are probably diverse because you are a group of people and not one person, but then also bringing in others to collaborate and build that, that PLN, that community that we often talk about, right?
Yeah.
In education. So if you're listening right now, I can't give you all the details, but Stephanie and I actually, we can't be here for the full hour because we have like other things to do. And so I really appreciate all of you being here. But just like any other episode, even though we're cutting this particular episode a little short, which that means Stephanie will have to have you back on, maybe in a season 2
Yeah.
mashup kind of thing. So Stephanie, like you've kind of seen a lot throughout your career. You see a lot now, right? Particularly being in ed tech, training teachers, being an advocate for oftentimes what is right in education. So to, from your vantage point, from your perspective right now, like, what is top of mind, and like what is under that hat in the sense of things that are troubling maybe, but also things that perhaps that you see going well that we should be optimistic about.
Yeah, one thing for me is my district that I just left was very innovative. They were ISTE's distinguished district,
Hmm.
and someone, I mean, I just had a phone call yesterday with someone, Cami. So if you're listening, hey, love you. What she was talking about is she was kind of bringing up like her innovator kind of idea that she wants to use for application, and it's just been again, it was kind of on my mind too as she was bringing this up, and she was talking about how do we or how might we keep these communities when innovative people leave? How do you keep the innovation going
Hmm.
at that school? How do you keep the innovation going in that classroom? And like for me, a lot of my department left for different reasons, different promotions, or different avenues in life, right? And it was like a lot of that momentum in um, the advocacy for blended learning, for personalization, the support there was slowly kind of fading away, right? Because different leadership was coming in and different things kind of needed to happen. So, how do you keep that innovation at the top, right? How do you keep that growing even when people leave?
Wow. Yeah. I I do not feel guilty right now. I mean, like like I kind of I felt that too,
Mhm.
and there was maybe it was more than one, but there was definitely at least one previous episode that I had that similar conversation of like when you do leave the classroom or a district, um, having that guilt of like you kind of see your impact and your value, um,
Yeah.
and then just this idea like I'm not spreading that like
Mhm.
you know in that way. Um, but I think it has more to do with what you're saying than just like us as individuals. Like, how do you build something
Yeah.
that will outlast you? Right? That's a quote from something. That might be a Hamilton quote. I don't know. Like it's something like that. That's gonna exist and still be present and have a culture that will, be there after a principal leaving
Mhm.
or a group of innovative teachers or I don't know, maybe a technology leader in a district, right? Like, so to me, it's more of a cultural thing
Yeah.
than like individual people. But you are right. Like there, it it might be quite challenging to keep that innovation going.
Mhm.
Um, so so are you saying that like maybe at your school, at your district, like they've seen a shift since like personnel change? Is that kind of what stirred this up, or was this a conversation that maybe broadly it's something we're seeing across the country or across the world?
I think it's kind of broadly, but I also think when we were at the sales kickoff event, so Cami did this amazing event where we all kind of got to meet in person. So I got to actually hug Steve in person. And at this event, we had a guest speaker who was the superintendent of, was it Houston ISD? Is that correct? I think one of the
Yeah.
Texas schools.
Maybe it may have been Dallas. It may
Dallas,
have been
yes, you're
Dallas.
right. You're right. So Dallas, and what he said that really stuck out to me, he said, when a superintendent is new to a district, the amount of district level personnel that also leaves. And I don't know, that just really stuck out to me when he said that because it's happened in a lot of districts that I've seen where they get a new superintendent. A lot of them will move to another district and then they hire new people. Those people usually have a different vision, right, than what was currently there. And so because of that, it sometimes can slow down that innovation because now you have a new focus. Teachers, I've also seen where they're veteran and they're like, oh, this will pass in 3 years because we're going to get somebody new, right? Um, and I think sometimes they get really, really exhausted, right, from all the new ideas that these different leaders have. And so how do you love your people, right? How do you get to know your staff, what they need and show their support to them, but then also innovate at that same time?
Right. Right. And to me, size matters, right? Like
Mhm.
when that happens at a fairly small district, that looks a lot different than like if it's one of the largest districts in the United States, right?
Yeah.
Like, um, and so for me, that's something to consider too. Is like, as Mantha, our friend Mantha's in the chat here, that new regime shift or that change, right? While it might be healthy at a certain level, it like it's kind of it can be rough, like from like a top down perspective, of like, things are moving, things are jamming, if you will, and then a big shift happens, and a lot of the times that does fall in terms of stress on the shoulders of teachers, right? And so I can certainly see that. um,
Mhm.
Absolutely. Okay. So, friends, I hope you enjoyed this very short conversation compared to the normal standard 1 hour of Under the Hat. But I appreciate all of you. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
I know that you and I have to, like, we have another engagement. But your Twitter handle's there, and then I'll put your website back up too. What are the best ways for people to reach out to you if they want?
Probably social media. I'm on all the platforms, posting all the time. So feel free to send me a direct message or comment on something, and I'll respond back.
Awesome. And friends, again, thanks for the continuous support. Really appreciate everyone that has liked, that has subscribed, that has reached out in some way to Under the Hat and what this show is trying to achieve. Underthehatpod.com. Go ahead and go there, subscribe, get on that mailing list. If you are interested in any of the social channels, all those links are up there. The episodes are there. You can also catch this episode and others on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, all the usual suspects of podcast. So feel free to give it a listen and continue to support, because we really appreciate it, and we really appreciate all of you being a part of this journey. Friends, have a good night. And as always, keep your hat on, but your minds open. We'll see you next time. Have a good evening.